What is your opinion, Jonathan, of the recently brokered so-called hostage deal between Israel and Hamas? Do you consider it to be a mistake? Do you consider it to have been unavoidable or a disaster, perhaps? And if it is a mistake, what would you have done?
This was not a mistake. It was a monstrous blunder. And I'm going to say something that I know is very controversial right now, but I must say it nonetheless. If I had a son or daughter in the army right now in Gaza, I would want them home. Leave. Put your gun down and come home. Why? The casualties that we are incurring right now are pointless. The future is quite discernible. We will not be allowed to destroy Hamas. As I wrote in several pieces, published pieces, Hamas's game plan, and the game plan of the Americans and the Europeans, is to drag out the hostage exchange process to such an extent that they wear us down. They will have the opportunity to reorganize, rearm, re-equip, reposition. And worst of all, I said several weeks ago that the Americans in particular and the Europeans will use the quiet to move in humanitarian aid representatives, which will prevent us from doing any military activity for fear of hitting a French doctor or an American aid worker. And now, today, I have proof of that, where the French now have said they're going to move a hospital, a field hospital, into Khan Yunis. Khan Yunis? Yeah. How are we supposed to maneuver around that? Well, we aren't. That's the whole point. I will never, and I know it's dangerous to say never, but I will never vote for the religious Zionist party ever. Ever. And I have friends, good friends, like Orot Struk and even Bezalel Smotrich and Simcha Rothman. Their decision, I don't care. I've heard Orot Struk's bizarre justification, rationalization for what they did. It's poppycock. I don't know what she's smoked or drunk or what she's been told, but it rings hollow.
She was told.
They caved.
She was told all sorts of things, as was Smotrich and others. Most of those things, if not all of those things, were lies.
Complete.
Just as, for example, what we were told just a few days ago by Netanyahu, and only a fool would believe Netanyahu. We were told a few days ago that we allow fuel into Gaza because to prevent an outbreak of some kind of disease or plague or what have you. Well, pull the other one. And it was necessary to have 60,000 liters of fuel per day to run the sanitation system. So there won't be an outbreak of, I don't know, cholera or some other disease. And now all of a sudden it's 150,000 liters. So wait a second, if it was just 60,000 for that system, why now 150,000? Obviously, right. It was obviously a lie, but many people still find it difficult to believe that Netanyahu is a liar, that all of our leaders and military leaders and political leaders, most of them certainly are liars, and incompetent, and
which
many
they
people
are.
refuse to believe that. Now, someone like Orit Strok, who is no doubt very well intentioned, but gullible and unaware of the way the world really works, she can be told all manner of all sorts of stories, and she bought it, and that's the explanation. She's not. She's to blame because she's out of her depth, but she's not to blame because she doesn't want to do the right thing. She does, but she doesn't know how.
Look, the only party that came out of this mess intact with its honor was Otzma Yehudi. They were the only ones. I cannot at this point vote for any other party except that one. They all have dirt. Look, here's the point. When we declared war, they declared war a long time ago. We just caught up with them. When we declared war, the first thing that the government should have done was declare a state of national emergency and told all of the hostage families, you will keep your mouths shut or we will shut them for you. You will not interfere in our management of this war. You will not be used by the international community or by our own leftists who managed the Shalit deal as a weapon against us. And if that means imprisoning to silence certain members of the hostage families, then so be it. We're in a state of war. I was dead set against turning all these posters out were kidnapped with all these pictures of these poor people that were kidnapped. Why? Because each one of them was a poison dart at our ability to wage total war against our enemies. We all knew from the start when Tony Blinken, after berating the so-called war cabinet for 7 hours, went and had a meeting with the Kaplan Force people and brothers in arms, telling them, we need you to take over the assistance for the evacuees, and we need you to take control of the hostage issue in order to help us end the war. The argument being, and I wrote about this in the Jerusalem Post, called Ship of Fools. That was the article. And everything I wrote in there was based on what I was told by people who were eye and ear witnesses to what Tony Blinken did and said. The anti-judicial reform movement has maneuvered itself, allowed itself to be maneuvered by the Americans into a position where they're waiting for the day after, when the guns fall silent, and they will make their move then politically. Look, we saved all the evacuees. We helped them. Look, we spearheaded the hostage, the return of the hostages. I'm not a cruel person by nature. I'm a realist. I once explained to people who were shocked initially by what I said about the hostages by using an analogy that I was taught, if you're the commander of a submarine and that part of that submarine is damaged, the commander, in order to save his ship, his boat, and save the remaining crew members, has to seal off the damaged part. And in the process, unfortunately, condemning all the men that are in that section to death for the greater good. These are decisions that we elect people to make. We do not elect people to use the unfortunate circumstances of the hostages, for example, as an excuse to buckle to the demands of our so-called superpower allies and world opinion. Because what will happen is that at the end, and no matter how long this process is going to take, the minute the hostage issue is resolved, the war is over, because the Americans are ready to say, you have no justification for keeping this war going. This is a war of aggression. You got your revenge, you got your people back. That's it. The guns fall silent, or else. This is why you don't go down that road. Why is it that people, everyone I talk to today, was not only ill at ease, but angry over what happened with this capitulation. And that's what it was, a capitulation by our government to Hamas. They won. They won the war because it doesn't matter. Did you see the list of people that are going to be released? It's horrific. These are people that tried to murder us. And these people are being released. The euphemism is women and children. Excuse me? An 18 or 17-year-old that tried to kill somebody because his knife broke off in the guy's neck and he couldn't stab anymore? This is a child? No, this is a terrorist. So my feeling today is one of intense sadness and anger. We are losing the cream of our people, the Chayalim, our warriors in Gaza right now. More died today. For what? Nothing. Nothing. We've lost the war. And I don't care what Bibi, the liar, says. But when you have someone like Gantz, who bragged about his willingness to sacrifice his men to save innocent Palestinian, quote, civilians, or Gadi Eisenkot, who during the fire balloon campaign against the Negev said that it was against his ethics to attack the teams preparing these balloons because they weren't, really offensive weapons anyway. This is who we're dealing with. And when you have a brain-dead incompetent like Yoav Gallant that doesn't have the brains, as we say in Texas, God gave a pissant, and a dead man, political dead man walking in the form of Bibi Netanyahu, because that's what he is. He's a dead man walking. When you have these people who were directly responsible for October 7th, now in control of things, it's not going to work. You can't have the same people who are responsible for the debacle somehow now saying, okay, we can take care of the problem that, okay, we created. And Bibi hasn't even admitted that yet, by the way. Chas v'shalom. He's not responsible for anything.
Unfortunately, I should point out, it was unfortunately not only predictable, but inexorable that Netanyahu would go along with such a capitulation, with such a hostage deal. If he initiated the Gilad Shalit deal, that was 12, 13 years ago, something like that. He initiated that deal when there was much less pressure and no real need to do so
at all,
for reasons of populism.
Correct.
and gaining favor in certain quarters. It was clear that he would do the same thing in the present situation with much more pressure brought to bear. It should also be pointed out that according to the Torah, which you mentioned before is the only law that we recognize, correct. According to the Torah, according to the Halakha, according to Jewish law, no such so-called hostage deal could possibly be agreed to. It is against the stipulations of the Halakha. The Halakha states explicitly, and for the very obvious reasons, that in ancient times, some people don't know, so I'll just paint the picture. I'll give the background. If you turn the clock back, shall we say 2,000 years ago, or 1,800 years ago, or 1,500 years ago, in many parts of the world, certainly in the Mediterranean, you had a kidnapping and hostage industry. You had pirates, you had people who went around grabbing people's ships. Yeah, the Bedouins, of course. So that's one. I mean, that's one of their specialties. You had hostages, You had pirates who would grab hostages, and then demand ransom for them. And this was a business. It was an industry, and so much so that there was a market value. In other words, a hostage a man of this age had a certain market value, whatever, let's say it was 50 pieces of silver. So that's what you could demand for such a hostage. And for another kind of hostage, a woman a different age, whatever it was, another price, because there was a market for this.
Right.
Our Chachamei Mishnah and Talmud, the sages of the Mishnah and the Talmud, stipulated in Masechet Gitin, in the tractate Gitin, that yes, Pidyon Shivuim, the redemption of hostages, of captives, is a great mitzvah, is a very important precept in the Torah, but only,
however,
at the market value, no, not above. Because if you pay beyond the market value, this has nothing to do with war, by the way. This is just a business. Right. If so, there's a Jew that you know has been taken captive. Yes, we will do everything we can, but not everything. We will go as far as we are able to go, according to the Torah, according to common sense, to redeem this person, and we will pay the market price. But if we agree to pay more than the market price, if the Jews make it known that whatever you demand we'll pay because there's a mitzvah of pidyon shivuim, of redeeming Jewish captives, then this will only encourage these pirates or these Bedouin, whoever they are, to take more Jewish hostages, and that will be self-defeating, and therefore you're not allowed to do so. This of course, just one more sentence for the record. This, of course, has nothing to do with the situation where you are dealing with an enemy who is trying to destroy you, because that was just a business deal. We're pirates. Yes. We have a captive. We want so much silver for him. Will you pay? Yes or no? Here we're talking about allowing our enemy to feel and to be convinced, correctly so, they are gaining a great victory over us. They are able to blackmail us. They are able to prevent us prosecuting the war against them well and
stakes are far higher
and achieving our aims. It goes without saying that such a deal is entirely against the Torah, against the halacha. And yet, how many Torah sages today, how many rabbis did you hear speak against this atrocious and dastardly decision?
Two things, if I may. Towards the end of my operation, I was going to be moved to Europe. And I was to have a new code name. My first code name was Danny Cohen. And this time I was asked, what code name do you want? And I said, I want the name David Ziklag.
You'll have to explain that, I think.
When David, before he was king.
You're talking about King David.
King David had his family, his entire camp, women and children, raided and abducted. He didn't negotiate for their release. He didn't agree or suggest a ransom. He went and got them by the sword. And he knew very well that there was a chance that some or many would die in the process. But the lesson was more important than the result. The lesson was, you kidnap our people, I'll come after you. Do your worst.
And destroy you.
And I will destroy you. Do your worst. You're not going to gain by this, except a quick death. I don't know if I told you this other story. When I relate this to people I speak to, they're incredible. I mean, they don't know what to say to me. During the fourth PMA, when we were releasing prisoners, John Kerry, Yemach Shemo, made an offer to Bibi in the cabinet at the time, that in exchange for releasing the worst terrorists imaginable, people whose hands weren't drenched in blood, but their entire body was drenched in blood.
Just to remind our viewers, what terrible deal or a capitulation are we referring to now?
This was towards in the Obama administration, when John Kerry offered to release me in exchange for Israel making a gesture to the PA by releasing some of the worst terrorists imaginable. The deal with me was that I would not be permitted to return to Israel ever, but I would be freed in Galut. So he asked Esther, my wife at the time, Alei Shalom, to come ask me for my response. Now, you can argue the ethics of having a person in my position with no hope at the time of being released. I was going to die in prison. That was my sentence. Make a decision on whether or not I would allow these horrible terrorists to go free. And they did, by the way, later. But I think Bibi understood very well what my answer was going to be. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. So Esther, alayhi salam, came to see me with the question. So she asked me, before you answer, I want you to know that if you say no and you stay in prison, I will stay with you. And if you say yes and you remain in the midbar, I will stay with you. So she said, what's your answer? So I said, no. So she said, well, can you give me a slightly more sophisticated answer than that? I have to go back to the cabinet and brief them. And I said, okay, hell no. So she smiled and she said, look, I need you to give me an intellectual answer that won't make me feel like a fool. So what is your answer? And I said, the answer is no for three reasons. Number one, if I agree to this, I will be devaluating the life of the victims. Number two, I will be lowering deterrence and encouraging additional acts of murder in our country by these animals. And thirdly, if I agree to this, I will be inflicting horrific pain on the victims' families who realized that the murders of their loved ones were being released because their fellow Jew was too weak to do the time that he was given. So I said, for those three reasons, I have to say no. So she looked at me. Now, Esther, alayhi shalom, was my morah. And she said, well,
your teacher.
My teacher. She studied with Emmanuel Shochet, Rav Emmanuel Shochet in Montreal for many, 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 many years. Toronto, many, many years. And she said, that's a fine answer, but it's not the Jewish answer. She said, as a Jew, you have to keep three things always in mind. Am Yisrael, Eretz Yisrael, Al Pi Torat Yisrael. And she said, everything you do has to be evaluated by those three things. So that when you stand before the Kisei HaKavod, hopefully after 120 years, and he asks you, why did you betray my land? Why did you prefer the Midbar to Eretz HaKodesh? She said, you won't have to worry about that because you will not have done it. You will remember what happened the last time, actually the first time that occurred with the Meraglim, when they cursed the land in order to keep their covet in the Midbar. And she said, we've been paying for that ever since. So she said, there are only two ways you can come home. Either as a Met, to be buried in Knesset Yisrael, or as an old man, and you get down and you kiss the ground. This is what Jews do. We don't live for the present. We live for Shemayim. And I understand it's hard to ask of children to know this. But we know what happened during Hanukkah with children who were told, you either eat treif or you die. And they died. Al Kiddush Hashem. A whole family, in fact, died. And the Greeks were begging them, please, they didn't even want to do it. So when I look at this hostage situation, I have to see it through the lens of my own experience. The government didn't have any problem at all letting me rot possibly to death. They didn't have any problem with that at all. And frankly, if that would have been my fate, well, at least I would have kept faith with a higher power and with my wife, a good woman. So now,
very special woman. I do want to have bring this current session to a conclusion. I think we can all agree that, as I said at the very beginning, I repeat now in conclusion, it is crystal clear that the Jewish nation is in dire need of a radically different ideology and a different leadership. And therefore, next time that we speak, with Hashem's help, perhaps we can address that question. How can we begin to take certain actions and create the infrastructure for producing the kind of leadership that the Jewish people so direly, so terribly needs and deserves.
To end on a high note, the Geula Shlema will come either with a shmais or with a kiss, depending on what we do. And that leads directly to the question we will address in our next conversation.
Once again, it's been a pleasure and an honor. And thank you for your many words of wisdom, my friend.
Shalom. Thank you. Shalom.